All right, folks, good evening. This is Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Tonight, return of Tim Canova. Gentleman is a very good friend of mine and one hell of a great politician. He's got some excellent stances that I think most progressives across the country like. Let's hope Florida's 23rd district likes it as well. Let me bring on Tim here for a moment. Tim, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I object to that introduction. I'm not a politician. A politician is a professional. They're somehow gaming the system and making money running for office. I'm a volunteer. I'm losing money running for office. I've been losing my own personal savings, and so I'm just a volunteer like a lot of other people in the movement.
I'm going to call you a statesman. Again. I'm going to call you a statesman. How's that?
I guess.
I'm going to go with you are a true leader. Let's go with that then.
Thanks, brother.
All right. So last we spoke, obviously, you'd come over and become an independent. The establishment has done its blackout, if you will. It has kind of kept a distance, and you have been fighting a noble war against the environmental dangers that are going on in Florida. You've fought against election rigging. You have taken on every progressive issue that we all know and love. I want to know, what is the status of Tim Canova's campaign as of today?
In many ways, it's good. I'd say 2 weeks ago we had a primary here in Florida, and even though we were not on the ballot because I'm running as an independent, so I was not on the ballot, for a Democratic primary. We still decided that we were going to canvass at as many of the early voting sites and primary election day sites as we could. So I got to probably a dozen of them, and we had volunteers and field organizers at probably about a dozen at various times. And the reception we got was uniformly very positive on a number of counts. First, make no mistake, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is highly unpopular here in her own district, and she was 2 years ago. In August of 2016, we found the same thing. Folks might say, well, but you lost that race. That opens up the whole can of worms. Did we really lose that race? We asked to see the ballots to verify the vote, and the supervisor of elections destroyed all those ballots in violation of state and federal criminal laws, including felonies. So anyway, in the last couple of weeks, we were very heartened during the primary early voting and voting sites. Wasserman Schultz, again, very unpopular, maybe 60% of the district disapprove of her. And I was pleasantly surprised that my name recognition is higher than ever, that voters have a very favorable view of our campaign. They see somebody who, after the August 2016 primary, did not give up, did not stop fighting. I can't tell you how many independents and Republicans in particular are so grateful for the fight that we brought to the Broward Supervisor of Elections and all of the corruption that we exposed. And in fact, in our Florida primary 2 weeks ago, the Broward Supervisor of Elections had yet another debacle of a primary. She found 5,000 ballots the day after the primary. Candidates' names were left off of many of the ballots for mysterious reasons. So suddenly, in the aftermath of that election, candidates who ran for school board, in fact, a number of candidates who were being backed by the parents of some of the Parkland shooting victims, the families of the Parkland shooting victims, they lost under mysterious circumstances. Two Republican congressional candidates in my district lost under mysterious circumstances, or suspicious circumstances, I should say. There were even candidates for Broward Commission that are scratching their heads and wondering if the results are accurate. And none of this is surprising. When you have a supervisor of elections who gets away with destroying ballots and committing felonies and is not fired and is not subject to criminal investigations, why would any losing candidate have any faith or confidence in the outcome of their election? Not only were we not allowed to see the paper ballots, but we also asked to inspect the software of the electronic voting machines, the scanning machines, the tabulation machines. And we were told what people are told all over this country. You're not allowed to. The software is proprietary. It's the private private property and trade secrets of the private software vendors hired by the supervisor of elections.
Wait, hold on. I got to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
You're telling me that for the public, our votes, which are supposed to be something that is sacred as a citizen, as a means of integrity for knowing that the governance of our nation is the sanctity of that is intact. You're telling me that we're supposed to just trust a private company,
yes,
and without any kind of independent verification.
That's right. You're not allowed to see the software. It's closed software. This country, and coming out of this ordeal from the last 2 years, has made me absolutely convinced that the only way we're going to get our democracy back and for progressives to stop losing rigged elections is if we have a system of 100% hand-marked paper ballots that are counted by hand in public on election evening and reported at the local precinct level right away. And when they're counted in public, they should be counted by tripartisan oversight, you could say. That when I say counted in public, it means there should be Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Greens, Libertarians, all at the table looking at the same thing. And they should actually be videotaping the counting as well. They should be allowed to. So that should be the first way to go about counting votes. And then for backup audits, you could have risk limiting audits, which should have, I believe, open source software. None of this closed source proprietary, you can't look at it. It's nonsense. And this is why the electronic voting machines have been banned all over Europe. They know how easy it is for any, well, foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, probably a lot of large corporations to hack, or an inside job, a software manipulation by whatever software companies are hired by whoever. So again, how the campaign's going, on some level, fantastic, in that our name recognition's way up. A lot of voters across the political spectrum respect what we've been doing. They think very highly of us for fighting this fight alone for so long. And now their eyes are opening up to exactly what I've been warning about, that the hub of all the corruption in Broward County is held in place. The hub of that corruption is the supervisor of elections. If you can make sure that your cronies get elected to the school board, as sheriff, county commission, you name it, then there's no accountability. And if there's any kind of graft or sweetheart deals with the contracting going on, no one's ever going to find out. The other issue that resonated was the environmental issue. And that also was across the board. I'd say lots of progressives on the left and Democrats, as well as independents and Republicans and conservatives, are absolutely shocked, alarmed, outraged, and depressed by what's been happening in Florida for the past 2 or 3 months now. We've seen, and this is periodic, it's happened for many years, but this is the worst it's ever happened, I believe. And that is the water pollution at Lake Okeechobee has flown through the Caloosahatchee River to Fort Myers and Cape Coral on the Gulf Coast. It's flowed eastward through the St. Lucie River to the Stewart area and the Atlantic coast, and it has killed all sea life in its path. And on the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, it's interacted with something called the red tide, which, you know, you'll get scientists who'll say the red tide and the toxic blue-green cyanobacteria algae, these are naturally occurring. Well, yeah, but in very small amounts. We see it happening now in colossal amounts. I mean, really enormous amounts, where there are dead zones now in the Gulf Coast off of Bradenton, not far from Sarasota and Fort Myers, that are miles and miles of dead zones. We posted photographs taken by a commercial fisherman out of Bradenton a couple of weeks ago. And the photograph is of dead fish floating on the surface of the Gulf for as far as the eye can see. And the commercial fisherman said he went out on a 3-day fishing excursion, caught only about 250 pounds of fish. You got to wonder who would eat that fish. And the last 12 miles coming into shore was nothing but death. So wow. We've been calling this out for some years. I had been warning 2 years ago of, I guess you could say, 2 major threats to the water of Florida. One is the fossil fuel industry we took the lead against the Sabal Trail pipeline and against fracking. We took a lot of heat for it. You know, some Russian bot purportedly retweeted my tweets against fracking and against the Sabal Trail pipeline, and I got lambasted by McClatchy, the owner of the Miami Herald. I mean, this is the kind of McCarthyism that they're throwing at me. And the other threat that we've been warning about for the last 2-3 years now has been the toxic blue-green algae and the way that big sugar interests and big agricultural factory farms have contributed to this water pollution. And, you know, many scientists have been aware of this, and many Florida voters, just a few years ago, over 70% of Florida voters approved a statewide referendum for the state would impose a small document transaction tax on real estate transactions. But there's so many real estate transactions that it would build up a fund of $1 billion, and it was to be spent on buying out the sugar farms south of Lake Okeechobee. Eminent domain is for that. And the point of buying out those sugar farms is to start allowing Lake Okeechobee to drain naturally into the Everglades like it did for eons. It would filtrate the phosphates and the nitrates out through the plant life of the Everglades. Instead, you know, the sugar companies have opposed it. The sugar companies have essentially bought the political class in Florida. The Miami Herald 2 years ago had a report that over the last 26 years, as of 2 years ago, the big sugar interests had spent $53 million in donations to Republicans and Democrats alike in Florida. So, you know, the state voters approved the referendum, and yet it doesn't get through Tallahassee, through the state legislature. And the problem, you know, they kick the can down the road. They're running out of road at this point, and it's really kind of sickening. You know, Florida, the sugar industry is sort of a sunset industry. You take a look, what has been the real drivers of employment and economic growth in Florida? It's been the tourist industry. It's been the marine sports industry. Those industries are suffering terribly right now because people go to the Gulf Coast and some parts of the Atlantic coast, and just the smell from the toxic algae is nauseating and making people sick. The New York Times had a report last week, I think, that on the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, doctors are reporting a marked increase in respiratory ailments. People are breathing this stuff in. It's airborne as well. And last week I went to the canals of Fort Lauderdale, and we spotted what certainly looks like the blue-green algae down here, whether it migrated through the intracoastal and the canal system, or if it was airborne and came down here. Either way, it seems to be here. And it was disturbing. I mean, we saw this toxic film on the surface of this canal, and what was floating on top of it was a dead iguana. You know, it's really sad to see this, and voters know that I've been really one of those in Florida leading the fight, and I've been able to because I don't take any big sugar money. This has been one of the hardships in the last year, is that our fundraising is quite challenged, and part of it is the social media type of throttling and shadow banning, as well as just the mainstream corporate media blackout. And all of that got so much more severe the moment we won on summary judgment in our ballot destruction case. And it certainly seems like that is the third rail of American politics. If you start questioning the outcome of your race, and you know, if they are rigging outcomes through manipulating software or hacking in, they're going to want a candidate like me to lose by enough of a spread that I'll be too humbled and too embarrassed to want to contest the election or inspect the ballots. And they had us lose by, or we did officially lose by 13 percentage points, which we always found to be not quite believable. Our internal field numbers based on knocking on 10 to 12,000 doors a week. I think in 2016, we probably had the largest field operation of any congressional district in the country, bar none. You know, the few consultants I had kept advising me to put more money into their pockets, you know, and I kept saying, no, we're going to open up another field office. We had 4 field offices in one congressional district. Bernie Sanders had 1 field office in all of South Florida. We were knocking on 10,000 to 12,000 doors a week, inputting the voter engagements into the Van Voter database. And I went and took a look at the database, our final field numbers, not too long ago. We were crushing Wasserman Schultz, and that was our experience on the ground. Now, in the past, if I would say that, of course, Canova's paranoid, he's a sore loser, they throw all kinds of garbage your way. But at this point, the evidence is pretty strongly circumstantial. When a supervisor of elections commits felonies to destroy evidence in an ongoing lawsuit, ballot evidence, and violates federal and state laws at the same time, you got to wonder, was that outcome at all, an accurate outcome? Now, it's a challenge raising money online, but we have seen a little bit of an uptick, and we're hoping that that continues. We need a lift right now, so folks out there, please go to timcanova.com and donate whatever you can. We also have a group of really some of the leading election activists and election recount lawyers in the country are about to descend on Broward County and on Hollywood, Florida. And they're coming here because a number of things. Well, they have their eyes on our election in November. They know that this is an important election here for a number of reasons. They've studied the outcome of 2016. They see that it's a very suspicious outcome. They see a candidate in me who has not crawled under a rock and instead has fought to see the ballots and is willing to put up with any name calling necessary to try to verify the vote. And I'm grateful that these eyes are on the 23rd Congressional District in Florida, and that these folks are coming here to raise a lot of hell and to really let the supervisor of elections and other Florida election officials know that if they try to rig this election, these folks are going to be facing lawsuits from day one.
That's a hell of a story, because I'm telling you right now, I think across the country, we've got similar situations top to bottom. I don't think that this is, I think it's unique in the sense that her stature in the Democratic Party and the fact that you ran against her as a Bernie-crat, I don't think that that was an accident in any way, shape, or form. Now that you're an independent, though, what I want to kind of explore, if you don't mind, it's obvious that you had really next to no choice but to go as an independent. And I know people are really, really excited that you've gone independent. That gets people, really, up in arms, and that's great. But the question is, why did you have to? And I think that that's really the deeper problem here is the machine that is down there. You spoke to a little bit with the graft and the the buddy system, if you will, but there's a bigger machine at play here that kind of puts you into a situation where you felt like you had no choice. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about some of the decisions that the process that you went through that forced you into going as an independent?
Sure. I had been a Democrat for most of my adult life. I had worked on Capitol Hill years ago as a legislative aide for the late U.S. Senator Paul Tsongas. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts. I grew up believing in the Democratic Party, the party of Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy, two of my political heroes in many ways. So it was not easy to leave the Democratic Party. And, I was hoping to be part of a reform movement within the party. That's what inspired me to run as a Democrat against the chair of the Democratic National Committee. I thought if we had taken her down in a primary, we would have been among the leaders within the party pushing for change. But it wasn't easy last time around, and it was clear it wasn't going to be easy this time around. And when I say not easy, at the very local level, at the very granular local level, when you show up to go to a Democratic Party club or caucus group or executive committee filled with 100 or 200 precinct captains, you get shunned as an insurgent candidate. They try to keep you away from the microphone. They change the rules the moment you get there so that you can't get up and actually give a 2-minute stump speech. They protect the incumbent from debates. They shower the incumbent with media attention. That's the media. The local media is usually part of this political machine. It certainly is here in South Florida. They shower Wasserman Schultz with media attention, corporate money, shield her from debates, keep me from even speaking. So that's, I had learned to kind of try to deal with that and, just off the shoulder kind of thing and keep moving forward. But when the ballot destruction case started to heat up And in the course of litigating it, we took the videotape depositions of Brenda Snipes, the supervisor of elections, and right there on videotaped sworn deposition, she is admitting to destroying all of the ballots. She is admitting that she signed the destruction order while the litigation was pending, 3 days after we served a discovery request, and the destruction order certified that the ballots were not the subject of pending litigation. That alone was a bombshell. And then the Florida Circuit Court grants us summary judgment, and in a 10-page written decision finds that the supervisor of elections violated all of these federal and state criminal statutes. So we really thought at that point, okay, folks will respond to these facts. It's now very clear the level of corruption that's occurring. And I sent a letter to every Democratic Party official in Broward County, Miami-Dade County, and in Tallahassee, informing them and providing the videotape deposition, providing the judge's order. And I had one simple request. Please join me in calling for an investigation. And Steve, guess how many of those Democratic Party officials responded?
Can I go with a bold answer of 0?
Right on. 0. You would think if this were a democracy within the Democratic Party of Florida, that there'd be enough room for dissent, for asking questions, that people would ask the questions. But it's not a democracy within the Democratic Party here. It's an authoritarian party. It's a hierarchy. It's saluting those above you. And that silence was quite a contrast to what we were experiencing here on the ground. The families of the Parkland victims, the students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, were anything but silent. And you take a look at those students, these millennials and younger, the estimates are 70% of them now are non-party affiliation. It's the fastest growing part of the electorate. Nationally, 45%, 46%, I think, of American voters who are registered independent, no party. That's larger than the Republicans and Democrats combined. And I thought, well, why? I don't play the part well of the battered housewife, of having Stockholm syndrome and starting to, have some kind of association with those who are terrorizing us or, screwing us over. That's not a part I think anyone should play. And I decided I'm going to run as an independent. I'll be on the ballot in November. And you take a look at this district. It's been gerrymandered for Wasserman Schultz so that she would have a safe seat for life. And about 23% of the registered voters in Florida's 23rd Congressional District are Republican. There's almost as many independents as Democrats at this point. And I thought, with those kinds of numbers, there's not even a big chance of me being the spoiler and somehow a Republican winning. I don't think a Republican will even take second in a three-way race. But I'm willing to take the chance of whatever the outcome is, because you got to expose this corruption. And Wasserman Schultz has been a huge part of what the problem is, not just in the Democratic Party, but in the politics of our country at this point.
Oh, absolutely. So, Florida is obviously, at least the way it looks from up here in Pennsylvania, seems to be the epicenter of climate change. And so much is going on right there as we speak. I mean, you spoke a lot about the various algae that are infecting the waters, the marine life that have died in mass, et cetera. But there are other factors that are affecting Florida as well that seem to be important to scientists, but not important to the establishment, hierarchy, if you will. What are some of the other things that concern your area in particular as climate change sweeps across the nation and the world, actually?
Yeah. I've seen very respected studies showing what Florida is going to look like in just a couple of decades, and then even further out in 50 years and further out 100 years. And it's very shocking if present trends continue, if climate change continues and there's melting polar ice caps and rising sea levels, a good part of Florida coastlines are going to be underwater. and this is going to become an enormous humanitarian crisis. So Florida very much is on the front line of what's happening with climate change. And I think that means people in Florida, elected officials, public servants in Florida, have a special obligation to lead on climate change. We led last campaign. We were endorsed by Climate Mobilization. You know, you're familiar with some of my scholarship as a law professor about public finance, and I'm very much in agreement with the conclusions of modern money theory that there need be no financial constraints on fiscal policy. And I've written in the past as a scholar about the World War II mobilization. And what made this mobilization of human resources and industrial resources and technological resources possible to win World War II in just 3.5 years and to dramatically, triple the size of the American economy, something like that in just a short period of time, was the mobilization of financial resources. And I firmly believe that we have the capability to move from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and not in some distant 20 or 30 year future, but within 5 or 10 years. If we really commit ourselves to it, that should be our goal. So climate change, and what are the causes of climate change? A lot of folks will point to fossil fuels, and I have, like I said earlier, I have fought against the Sable Trail pipeline and fracking and liquefied natural gas facilities here in our communities. But the scientific studies have shown for a while that factory farming contributes even more to climate change than all the fossil fuels combined. Well, you take a look at our farm bill, and the taxpayer has been subsidizing the factory farms, the big sugar farms, to the tune of billions of dollars over the last few decades. So these folks who usually will attack somebody like me for standing for Medicare for all and say, how are you going to pay for it? And isn't that socialism? Well, you take a look at Medicare for all, and it's taking from the many to give to the many. You take a look at these farm bills and the sugar subsidies. You're taking from the many to give to the few, to reward practices that are not just hurting the many, they're going to hurt future generations. They're going to hurt life on this planet. They're putting the future at risk. So if they're really not socialists, stand up and prove it. Give back those subsidies. Get rid of them. We should be subsidizing organic farming. We shouldn't be subsidizing factory farming. These factory farms, I'll tell you what's going into Florida's water, and it's going into the Mississippi and right down the Mississippi into the Gulf, creating a huge dead zone south of New Orleans and contributing to the red tide. It's all this agricultural runoff. It's phosphates and nitrates. Scientists are now saying herbicides as well, glyphosates. It's the animal waste that includes antibiotics and synthetic growth hormones. And it's happening on such an industrial, enormous volume that it has really messed with our ecosystem in a big way. It's contributed to climate change, and the climate change itself, with the warming water temperatures, are breeding this toxic algae. And it's not just Florida. The New York Times has had articles in just the past couple of weeks. We see it happening in Lake Erie, in Lake Superior. It's happening overseas. And I just went to a screening a few weeks ago of a film called Toxic Puzzle, narrated by Harrison Ford. Scientists are finding a correlation between living close to these toxic algae blooms and higher rates of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, and they suspect even Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. So this is crazy. It's like we are poisoning our own environment, and we're subsidizing the contamination itself. We're undermining human health. We're undermining sea life. If we start undermining life in the oceans, I mean, there's scientists, and they've been writing this. I remember from the last campaign. And again, it was the New York Times, which I think is a very establishment paper, obviously, that scientists are saying that the oceans are becoming so acidified that in 20 or 30 years down the road, there might not be any life in the oceans. Well, imagine that. I hate to sound apocalyptic, and I know a lot of voters don't want to hear apocalypse. But again, this is scientific studies behind this. If they want to say you're for science, well, follow the science, okay? And if we destroy our oceans and make them into oceans of acidified water. It's going to rain down on the earth. We're going to have acid rain, and it's not coming from fossil fuels then. So we have to start developing the technologies to sequester carbon, to take it out of the environment, to start cooling our planet. I don't know if any of this is even possible, but that's a big mobilization. And that gets to the economic side of it, of course, and the financial mobilization that's required. So I've been for a federal jobs guarantee. I've been for a solar green New Deal based on renewable energy. And there's no shortage. And it's, you know, it's not just changing the electricity grid from fossil fuels to solar and wind. It's also a matter of rebuilding our infrastructure for transportation, for water systems. You take a look at everything that's being privatized now, and of course you look at the cycle. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know you're aware of this, very aware. But if you have enough fiscal austerity in the public sector for long enough, it starts fueling the privatization. And we say the declining public schools, K-12, followed by the charter school movement and privatization. We've got the privatization of the healthcare industry. That's been happening for decades. That's why what's the alternative? It's Medicare for all. We've got privatization of water systems, of transit systems, and electronic voting systems. We have privatized the electronic voting system so much that, well, we already talked about it today.
Tim, I want to say something, and forgive me. This is a moment of soapbox, but I want you to respond to it if you don't mind. Yeah, I have been railing on this because, you know, you and I, when we first met, the very first time we met, you said something very poignant that I didn't like, but I'm liking more now. Let me just tell you. Okay. I think I'm more like you on the couch that day than I was when I was on the couch that day. Because what has happened is that the pain and suffering that real people feel as a result of economic austerity, as a result of these piss poor neoliberal decisions, and the people's apathy for learning about what is actually happening to their world, and the politicians that are more than willing to play on the ignorance of the people to keep that cycle going. Mm-hmm. The only way I could find to express the inner rage that I have is to show the absolute cause and effect of austerity. I mean, I still talk in technical terms at times, but I spend a lot more time on the emotional truths. I have a son with autism, mm-hmm. and I think about what it takes to actually take care of a child with autism. When you go from the parental's work situation and having to have the flexibility there, and you look at all the other things that go with this. I mean, my father passed away of a very, very rare disease in progressive supranuclear palsy. It was first thought as Parkinson's, but it turned into something more lethal. Mm-hmm. And you look at all these things that we could fix right now, and people are so trapped in that neoliberal trap, that trap that the bipartisan system, that uni party has created. Tim, I don't know how to overcome this other than just to keep beating the heck out of it and explaining to people what neoliberalism is. You know, I hear people say voting for the lesser evil. Hey, man, I vote for the most progressive candidate. I'm not even worried about that. What I'm worried about is the people understanding what in fact is going on in their lives and what in fact is going on around them. Because once the lights go on, it's empowering. It's brutal because then you got to look at the world for what it is, but it is empowering to know what you're actually fighting against. Tim, how bad is neoliberalism in the state of Florida?
Oh, it's been terrible here in the state of Florida and nationwide for many years now. I want to applaud you for your efforts. And, you know, 20 years ago, I met Warren Mosler 20 years ago, even before that, Randy Ray. So I had these discussions about MMT, about modern money theory, many years ago. These are brilliant people, but they're very much in the ivory tower. It's a very high level of abstraction for most people to be able to relate to. What you've done in the past couple of years that I've known is to bring modern money theory down to the masses and to help explain it in ways that I think a lot of people can relate to. We need to educate people. Look, some folks have said, why are you still running? Can't they rig it against you again and get away with it? They did last time, perhaps. And I'm hoping that having these election experts and recount lawyers on my side will deter them from rigging the outcome, and if they do, to detect it and fight it. But ultimately, I decided I'm going to keep running because I have a platform and I want to educate the voters on these kinds of issues that matter while I can, and to expose the corruption. For the last several decades, really, I mean, I've had a long career as a law professor and a scholar. I've been writing about neoliberalism. I wrote a series of law review articles, published a series of them in the 1990s and early 2000s. Sometimes it referred to the system as neoliberalism. Sometimes it talked about the Washington Wall Street consensus. But it's the same thing. It's public austerity, privatization, deregulation, central bank independence, liberalization of trade and finance. The whole range of policies in this agenda that reward the very few at the top of the economic pyramid and leave everybody else behind. And the statistics bear it out that something like 94 cents of every new dollar is going to the top 1%, or I think, maybe it's even 1/10 of 1%. Listen Liberal had some of these, Tom Hartman's book had some of these statistics in there. They're very, very revealing, very eye-opening. So what are the solutions? I'll tell you, I've been speaking out for some years now. I remember a job talk for a job that I got and accepted at Chapman University in 2003, 2004. I'm losing track of time. But the job talk was how to reform corporate governance, and that we take a look at these boards of directors, and the boards are handpicked by the CEO. The boards are made up of CEOs. You could say it's governance of, by, and for CEOs. And not surprisingly, they rubber stamp everything the CEO wants, and all the incentives are to maximize short-term profits, to squeeze that extra penny of earnings per quarter. A penny per share. And how are they going to squeeze those profits? They're going to squeeze it by squeezing their own workers, by ripping off consumers, by fouling our environment, by corrupting our politics. They do all of this. And the boardroom just rubber stamps it all. So I've been saying for years, why don't we look at Germany and Sweden and Denmark and Norway and Holland and many countries of the world and start putting public representatives or labor union or worker representatives on those company boards. Because a country like Germany, where labor makes up, I think, 50%, 49, 50% of the board members of, I'm talking about large corporations, not family owned, not small businesses. I'm talking about huge publicly traded corporations. The CEO makes about 20 times what the rank and file worker makes. In the United States of America, the CEO of these large corporations makes something like 400 times as much. So it makes sense. If you have some labor representatives on that board, maybe somebody representing environmental interests, somebody representing, you could say, the taxpayer or consumers. It's a little harder, I'd say, for the CEO to get this winner take all, to get everything he or she wants. That they've got to justify it to real human beings in a boardroom. And I think that's the way we need to go, and I've been speaking out about it. I was very happy to see Elizabeth Warren just about 2 weeks ago announce that she's introducing legislation that would provide 30% of those board seats to be representing workers of these companies. And that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. All right. So, Tim, we got a couple minutes left. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of let folks know what's going on in terms of how they can help and what are some of the key dates coming up and any key events that might be coming up that people can get involved in.
Sure. Well, a week from tomorrow, on Monday evening, September 17th, we're going to be having a forum in Hollywood, Florida, that's going to include some of the nation's top election activists, analysts, and recount lawyers. And I would urge folks to block that out Monday evening, September 17th, and tune in. And we need resources down here. So what we need are folks to contribute some money online, small donations at timcanova.com. We've been shadow banned. We've been throttled. So a lot of folks aren't seeing our posts coming up on their Facebook news feeds. They try to search for us and they can't find us. So I would urge folks, please find us at Facebook, because this is probably the social media platform that's in the past been most helpful to us. We have over 90,000 followers on it. I would urge folks to please go there and to look at our posts and to share them widely, and to go to your notifications and select for us to see our campaign Facebook page first, to see first, and to share on social media, share widely. There are people phone banking for us. I know the MPP movement, the Movement for People's Party, has had a postcard writing campaign. So that's helping to replace direct mail for us, that people all over the country are sending postcards to voters in our district to introduce me and to talk about me and to put a personal touch on it. We've got people who are doing phone banks. And I would urge folks who can afford the time and expense to please come to South Florida. Our early voting starts October 22nd. And if you could manage a few days or a week or two, last campaign we had folks from all over the country come here and they knocked door to door for us. We need that kind of commitment. I firmly believe the political revolution still runs through the 23rd Congressional District of South Florida. It did last time, it does again. And a lot of the reason it runs through here is because Florida is a key state. If progressives want to win Florida in 2020, we got to fix this election rigging now in 2018. Okay, Broward County has the most Democrats of any county in the state of Florida now, even more than Miami-Dade. If the establishment can rig elections in Broward County, it's going to be very tough for fill in the blank, whether it's Bernie Sanders or some other progressive running for the White House. It's going to be very hard to win a primary, and it could be very hard to win a general election in Florida as well, because what the Democrats presumably are doing in Broward County, Republicans are doing in red counties all over Florida. Our election system is broken. It doesn't resemble a democracy. It resembles organized crime at this point. I'm willing to call it out for what it is, but I need folks to back me up, to step up, to contribute whatever they can, whether it's $5 or $50 or $500, you name it. I need folks to help. I put my life savings into this. I'll come out of this campaign broke personally, and I'm not complaining about it. This was the right thing to do, but I need folks to step up and help us in every way they can.
Tim, I want to thank you once again. You have been a friend of the program and a friend of mine personally for a number of years now, and I am pulling for you and pulling for our movement. And I just want to thank you for everything you do for Real Progressives, everything you do for me as a human being. And I wish you well, sir. Thank you so much for everything. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Steve. Love you. You take care.
You too, brother. Bye-bye.